Hey everybody, it's Dr. Bain here, and this is the first episode of the Unruly Doctors podcast. So I guess I kind of wanted to do an introduction into, what's the idea behind this podcast and, really what's the necessity of it. So I think in like the last couple months, at the clinic I've been treating a lot of patients, and it's been a pretty interesting, I would say, last year. Sorry, I needed a drink. Where, I've been going through a lot of spiritual contemplation and a lot of exploration. And I guess, you know what, I think it's probably appropriate that, talking about this, that I should probably tell the story about really what happened. And so, I apologize if it's kind of a long story, but it is really interesting. And in terms of, I think it's really relevant to why I felt like we almost needed an outlet as a clinic, but also as a person almost, because I do feel like there is a deeper calling for people needing to hear kind of a different perspective on what is really going on, not only with current events. I think recent events with C-19 and everything going on was really just kind of a catalyst for a lot of people to look at their existence, look at life, and kind of think of, why am I really here? What am I really doing? And I think it's been a really interesting, and it's almost been a year and a half now of having to go through everything recently, and having to look at yourself and look at, well, man, if everything really crashes or if everything really goes badly, what's the whole point of all this? So I'd say it's probably about a year and a little bit of change ago. I kind of just had like a really, big existential crisis where, and I think everybody goes through this at some point in their life where you're kind of just sitting around, you're going day to day, and you're like, man, what am I doing? Like, we're really sitting in a world where, you go every day and you're doing something. And I love my job. I really do. I love treating patients. There's nothing better. So I'm not denying that there's a lot of satisfaction in healing people. But the dilemma for me was, you're getting up every day, you're doing the exact same thing in some version. You're going to work, you're collecting money, for doing a service. And albeit it's a very good service. But then, you go to bed and it's kind of like a cycle over and over and over again. And you're really looking at your friends and everybody's getting older, right? So I'm 30, which some of you are out there right now and you're thinking, no, that's not that old, but anybody who really knows me knows that I'm a pretty old soul. I feel really old. And I didn't really have a great explanation for that until this year. And I'm sure in future podcasts and video episodes, we're going to go over a lot of the self-discoveries I've made and continue to make as I keep digging into my own existence and interesting things like that. But, so at that time, about a year and some change ago, and I was having that kind of existential crisis and, just a lack of motivation, I guess, for, what is the point of all this? I ended up happening upon some information, and there's a bunch of different books, and one of the books I ended up happening upon, and I wish I could tell you how I happened upon it, but, if you talk to me now, it's because I was supposed to find it, whether that looked like an accident or not, but it was a book called The Place Between Here and There, and it's a book written by a guy, average Joe, who he was on a motorcycle and he had a big accident and he popped out of his body. And he had a near-death experience. And it's a really interesting book because the whole book is really just talking about just that one incident for him, but how it changed his entire life because when he died, as he popped out of his body, he basically went to the other side and got to have a little peek into how this all really works, the real reasons of why we are here and what is the point of all of this. And, for a long story short, I mean, if people are really interested, please comment, like, subscribe, leave me something, because a lot of people love, commenting on my videos. They'll give a little like or a thumbs up or whatever it is. But what we really need is, as we're expanding this social media presence, and I'm really following and calling here, and I am called to help inform people and give them a different perspective on life and things. I can tell that's the next step of my journey for my life. It really is helpful when I learn from you guys. What does it really want to hear discussed, or what is it you really want my opinion on? Because that really gives me a lot of direction. But when I finished that book, it really gave me a lot to pause and to think about. And, when I did that, it took me a while. I'm a very contemplative guy. I don't really think about surface level stuff. I'm always thinking about, what is my existence? What am I here for? I'm always thinking about stuff like that. And I know it sounds really odd to a lot of people. But when I read that book, one of the suggestions he's like, look, if you want proof of what I am saying, that there is something after this, that you do have a team of guardian angels, spirits, spirit guides, ascended masters is a term some of you may have heard of. If you want proof of that, you need to ask. And what's funny is a lot of us have these questions, and we're always asking other people. We're asking other human beings who are incarnated on this earth currently for what do they believe? Or, when we go to church or something, we're letting another person who's incarnated and still questioning their existence tell us their opinions of what do they think is really going on. But the one thing we don't ever do, which is really intriguing, I find, at least not a lot of times, we don't ask for proof. When we pray or when we meditate and things, and I think some people, they don't do it because they feel like maybe it's a selfish ask. But, I would make an argument to you that that isn't selfish, and that God, or, if you want to say the universe, or, all the different terms you could use to describe really the controller and creator of things, is that God gave you the capability to ask, right? And God lets you have the thought that, man, this is pretty crazy, and I don't really know why I'm here, and I'm kind of confused, and ask a question. In your whole life, you've been trained up to this moment that there is no wrong question to ask, or at least, I guess if you were at a good class, right? Some of us had some teachers who were not so good and didn't like when you ask questions. I could tell you 1,000 stories about how when I was in school, I was always the one asking a question, and was ridiculed many times for the questions I asked because it was never part of the mainstream questioning. Sometimes you would get shamed for being a critical thinker, and that's only gotten worse as time's gone on. But I digress. So in his book, he's talking about how if you just ask for some type of proof and you get specific, you're going to get what you ask for. And I thought, oh, okay. And I thought, God, and this is a piece of human nature where it's like you want to make it awkward for yourself to do something like that. You're judging yourself, and you're like, God, I feel weird. This is weird. Well, that's you doing that to you, right? Because you're in your head. Nobody knows what you're thinking about. So time came up in the clinic, and I decided to do a suggestion. So I tried to think of something, I don't know, I guess more specific. I didn't really know what to ask. I've never done it before. It's like the first time you drive a car, right? It's like the first time you drive a car, you're like, oh my God, what is the steering wheel? What is, and you're if any of you ever driven a car with a teenager or something for their first drive, oof, that is a scary experience. I think we could all agree, because they don't know what they're doing. And so it was a lot like that when I was sitting by myself. It's how bizarre that is, that I was almost embarrassed to ask for something in my head, because I'm like, God, you must be a nutcase, asking nobody for help or for a sign or for something. So anyway, so I asked, I said, God, the universe, guardian angels, whoever, may or may not be listening. Give me a sign, give me something. And I'm a really logical guy, or at least I used to be. I'm very logical still, but the more I understand about metaphysics and everything else, it has expanded that logic to a lot of different open things. But anyway, I was like, send me something, and it has to be something obvious, is what I said. It has to be big, and as awful as that sounds, to ask the big man, and I say man, but God does not have a gender. That's ridiculous. We're personifying God. We're personifying a creation energy, right? But just because currently I'm a man in this incarnation, it's helpful for me, I guess, to personify somewhat. But I was like, give me something. I need something obvious. So anyway, I come to the clinic not that long after that, and yeah, man, it's still very interesting to think about. So it was like Christmas-ish time last year, I think. And so I'm up front, and I had just picked up golf, right? Because during this whole situation of C-19 hitting, everybody's looking for an outlet outdoors, of something to do outdoors, because those are the places that are still open, right? So I was like, oh, well, my buddy, Dr. J, so Dr. Jackson, one of these times I'll have Dr. J on the podcast once we get a little deeper into it. So, anyway, so he was in town, and so we went golfing or whatever sometimes. So he's the one that got me into golf. So, now I'm obsessed. I get the golf bug, whatever. Most expensive sport on the face of the earth. So, I'm up front, I'm putting, and I'm practicing my putting. And here's what I can tell you. There was nothing on the floor. The door is closed. The floor was just swept. Everything is clean, and that's an important detail in a second. So, so one of the patients is in the back, and she's like, guys, I got to show you this. It's a Christmas Day miracle. And I'm thinking, okay, all right. Sounds awesome, right? So, I leave my putter, and Teresa, my office manager, and Kasia, one of my other girls, we all head back into the back. So nobody's up front, right? It's empty. So we head in the back, and she shows us, she pulls up her phone, and she's like, look at this, Christmas morning miracle, right? And it's like her hand, and she's holding a massive bundle of like these baby down feathers from some like bird or something. And I'm like, what is that? And she's like, well, me and my daughter pulled up into the driveway, and our car was just showered with these like little baby down feathers. And there's no birds, according to what she said. There's no birds anywhere. There's no birds, I'm telling you. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And she's like, I'm like, so what's the significance? And she was like, well, when an angel visits you, they leave these feathers. And if it's and I said, well, then why are they so teeny? Because, in my own ignorance, right? When we talk about angels, I'm thinking, big feathered. It's kind of like the movies, right? Every time you watch a movie, these angels are like big wings, and or if you ever watch the show Lucifer, he's got these giant feathers, right? And you're like really impressed. They're huge, right? And she's like, no. She's like, that's if an adult angel visits you. And I'm like, is there baby angels? If I had ignorance, is there young angels? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, like I said, logical guy, I guess, young angel, teeny feathers and wings, and, older angel, bigger and, larger angel wings. So I was like, all right, well, I guess that makes sense. So anyway, so I kind of like put it in my bank. And here's the thing. We weren't back there for more than a minute. I'm telling you, 60 seconds. It was boom, 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 boom. Cool, awesome, banked it. And so I'm walking back up. And as I walk back up to the front, I'm not even joking you, it's so crazy. Right next to my putter was a baby down feather. The exact kind of baby bird down feather that was in her picture. It had the same color. It was the same size. Woof. Talk about a sign answered. And in fact, if you're ever in my clinic or a patient, or if you're a current patient, if you go look on the board I have a board where I put the business cards of other local business owners. It's still on my board. So the actual feather itself. So, if that doesn't give you chills, I don't know really what will. But like I said, I've changed as a person quite a bit in the last year. And here's what I can tell you. for whatever reason, that still was not enough for me at the time. And I know a lot of you are probably pulling your hair out and you're like, dude, what are you talking about? How is that not enough for you? And it wasn't enough, I think, at the time because, being on planet Earth and being deceived by different people, different situations, different whatever, like we've all been burned by something, right? Like, you got sold a car or something and then the car breaks down and then the warranty doesn't count or something, right? We've all had that, or we've had a betrayal, right? A spouse cheated on you, or we've all been there, right? So it's very easy to take your logic and logic yourself out of this problem. And so I was like, okay, that was cool. And so, it was like that next night, I was like, hey, nice. I don't know. I mean, in terms of like, what do? You're complimenting and you're thankful, right? So like a lot of the big things I was reading was gratitude is huge. If you want more. So I was like, you know what? I am genuinely grateful for what you have sent. But here comes the but, right? But for whatever reason, I need more. And that's what I needed. I said, I need more. It wasn't enough. Okay. So God was like, sure, I'll send you more. So, and I didn't really know, I guess I didn't get that particular at the time, right? And sometimes even now, I've told this story enough times at the clinic where kind of the exact time frame is a little lost. I'm not exactly sure which of these events quite happened before the other, but they were all within probably a 2-month time span. So here's like a part 2 of this thing. A part 2 of this thing was at that time I was also reading another set of books that I got turned on to. Once again, and I don't even know how I got turned on to them, to be honest with you. I think it was because at that time I was listening to a lot of near-death experiences because I had a massive, massive fear of death. And how ironic is that, to have this like fear of death, but yet feel so informed about a lot of these types of things, I guess. It was really ironic and strange and whatever. Maybe that's not the right word, but you get what I mean. It didn't really match. But so I'm reading these Dr. Brian Weiss books. If you ever heard of Brian Weiss, he is a hypnotist. I believe he's still alive. He's getting older now, but he developed a technique of hypnosis to take people into past lives. So if you've never read any of his books, I'm telling you, you gotta go buy his books and read them because they are fascinating. People remembering lives and things, and then these details then getting confirmed later as being truly historically accurate. But not only that, but the person did actually exist in another lifetime. Like it's really fascinating stuff. So I read like all of them. I mean, I bought like 4 or 5 books, and I'm telling you, I'm a reader, but like this series of books, it got me, and I like burned through like 4 books, and I'm telling you, like a week. I couldn't stop reading them, and that's me working full time too. So that means I'm getting home at 8 o'clock. I'm reading that book from like 8 o'clock till almost midnight probably, and I'm getting up at 4 a.m. and I'm reading it 2-3 hours before I start my 12-hour shift of treating patients with chiropractic. So, I mean, it just, got to me some way, right? So anyway, remember, this is when I'm picking up golf. So anyway, I book a tee time around that time, a wintertime tee time. And it's just as a single. So if you ever played golf, if you add on as a single, they'll usually add you on with somebody, right? Especially if it's a busy golf course. So I drive up to this new golf course. I've never been there. And they had me on with another guy. So it's just me and him. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And his name was Scott. Now, I don't know if it happens to have any correlation, but my dad's name is Scott, but maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So anyway, me and Scott get to chatting as we're golfing, and I would love to say that I'm a great golfer at that time, but I was terrible. I didn't even own my own golf clubs at the time. I rented. But we're chatting and stuff, and he's like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a chiropractor. And I usually try to avoid it because with that label, you get a lot of, you either get someone who's super jazzed or you get someone who's anti and they want to put me on the stake and burn me and right in front of them, right? So I usually try to hide it from new people just so I don't have to go there in case that's where they're going. But he's like, oh, that's cool. We were just chatting. I'm like, what do you do? And he was talking about what he does. And I think he worked at Home Depot. And so a really nice guy. And so he's like, what else do you like to do fun? You're golfing, and obviously you just picked that up. And he's like, what else do you like to do? And I'm like, well, I'm reading these books. He's like, really? What are you reading? He's like, because I'm a reader. He's like, I'm a reader. He's like, what are you reading? Maybe I want to read it. And I said, well, you probably never heard of him. He's not really well known in a lot of circles. I said, you might have heard of him. His name is Dr. Brian Weiss. He's like, oh, I know Brian. And I'm like, what? Because I'm telling you guys, I'm sure this is probably the first time you've ever heard of Brian Weiss, unless you've really been digging for metaphysical stuff, right? But he's like, yeah, I know Brian. And I'm like, really? And he's like, oh, yeah, dude. He's like, not only have I read all of his books, he's like, I've even been to his seminars, and I remember 10 different past lives. 10. And I was like, whoa. That's okay. And so when I'm digging into it, and he's telling me about how he remembers a life as he incarnated here several times as a Japanese citizen, both male and female. He remembered a lifetime of being a small infant in Egypt, being thrown into the Nile to get eaten by crocodiles as part of that whole biblical history of trying to basically kill the Messiah. All this type of stuff. It was just fascinating just listening to him talk. And what was so funny was just before this meeting, okay, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit because like I said, this all got so jumbled over that course of time. One of my patients one day, she came in and I told her about the feather story. And she's like, dude, Patrick, and she's a Christian, right? So she's like, dude, Patrick, what do you think that means? I said, well, I got what I wanted. And she's like, yeah, but that's Jesus coming to tell you that this is the thing. And I think we got to add a little context for this, because one of the other things that had happened very similar in time frame to the feather thing was I had a day. Okay, so I'll come back to the golf thing. Like I said, as I'm telling this story, I'm starting to remember more and more about what happened in the real time frame of this. So I apologize if it's a little jumbled, but I promise you it's worth it. But, so anyway, so right similar to the time frame of the feather thing, I had a day of work where it was like Jesus motifs all the time. Now, this isn't a video to convert anybody to Christianity. I'm not actually personally a Christian. I'm just very spiritual. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. But especially as I've dug deeper in meditation and other things. But that's a whole nother story. But, so around the same time as feather story, I had a day where it was just like a lot of Jesus motifs. Just like you could not stop these things. Like, for example, I'm treating a patient and she keeps talking about Jesus. And I'm like, oh, okay, awesome. I'm listening and things like that. And my patients really care about me. So, I really do appreciate when a Christian person who believes in hell and believes in these things is trying so hard to pull me in. And I get that because they care. And I that's exactly how I take it. So, if you're one of my patients who's a Christian, or if you're a Christian watching this, I really, truly appreciate what you are trying to accomplish. So anyway, so she was doing that, right? And I'm listening, and we're great friends, and I have very good patients. I'm very grateful. So anyway, so that happens, and then another patient comes in, right? And this is like around the same time frame. Once again, this is around Christmas-ish time, about to be Christmas. And he says, "Hey man, I got you a card." I'm like, "What? Cool." I'm like, I love getting gifts from patients. Really, really cool. And that doesn't happen often, right? So he gives me a card. I open it up, and what's in there? Another religious card. And I open it up, and there's like a little baby Jesus. Looks like a stained glass window, and it's like a little plastic thing. It's for your car. And I'm like, oh, okay. There's another one. And they were like back to back. It was like, poof, poof, poof. I'm like, all right. So I treat a couple more patients, right? And then lunchtime rolls around, and I'm driving home. And at that time, I lived closer to the clinic, so it was a little drive away. And so I'm driving, and then this bicyclist cuts me off. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm not mad about it, right? There's no rush. So I'm waiting for this guy, right? And he's pulling this kind of like, what do you call that? It's like a trailer. He's pulling a trailer with his bicycle, essentially. And so he pulls right up in front of me. And on the back of his little trailer thing, you can't make this up, it says, "Jesus loves you" on the back of his trailer. It was like a message almost directly to me. And talk about, I'm like, okay, now we're turning the heat up even more. And I was getting, but the funny thing was I was actually getting more confused, because here's the thing. At that time, and even now, and actually now, it's funny. I learned why all these things had to happen later, and it even almost had more recent even. I learned why these things had to happen the way they did. But at the time, that really what confused me, because at that time I was like, you know what? All these religions have a lot of great merit. They have a lot of good stuff in there. Not everything's good, right? But a lot of good things in there. How do you treat each other? Should you live your life? When you do something, try to consider how is this going to affect somebody else? Try not to be greedy. Try not to kill people. And some great, all those great basics, right? So I love all that type of stuff, right? So in my head, I'm like, I think there's great things in Buddhism. I think there's great things in Christianity. I think there's great things in the Muslim religions, right? And so then when I kept getting these Jesus motifs, I'm like, it's really strange. I'm like, I really thought I was on to something, because it was also being shown to me. All these different religions were being shown to me as well. I felt like they were being that way. And so I was just like, man, okay, now I'm really confused. But I'm like, well, and then in comes your logic, right? Because you're human beings. So my human logic, my human incarnation logic was like, well, I'm living in a very religious town, and it is. The town that I have my practice in, Surprise in Arizona, is a very Christian town. I mean, you throw a stone and you're gonna hit a Christian somewhere. Okay, you throw a stone, so we're a Christian. All right, so that you're going to get that. So then so I had lunch, so I go home, or not? I go home, I have lunch, and then I go back to the clinic for the night shift. And at that time, I started a new tradition, and I'm going to do the same thing this year, hopefully bigger, because now I have a bigger network of patients and people and things, and where basically I put the little feelers out, and I supported 10 different families for Christmas. I said, hey, I went on Facebook, and I said, hey, if there's any families in need who, need help with Christmas presents, I'm not rich, but please send me a message, and I'll try to help you in some way. And boy, I got a response. Let me tell you something. If you're looking to do something really great this Christmas, if you just go on Facebook and you just make a post in one of those Facebook groups, I'm telling you, there's a lot of people that need help. And if you can support one family, or if you want to contact me before Christmas this year, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did last year. I'm going to put a little feeler out there and say, hey, guys, I'm going to do the exact same thing. And if you want to be a part of that, or if you want to donate, gift cards or money or presents or things like that, and then you want us to handle it and we can give it to families, you just let me know from the clinic email and stuff like that. But anyway, so I go back and I finish my shift. I get off at like 7:30 at night. I work pretty long hours. And I was like, okay. So I had like 2 more families to add on right the last second. And I was like, I got to go to Target. I got to go get more wrapping paper and presents. I got to get these things on this list. So I go, right, and I'm checking out now. And if you've ever been to Target, which I'm sure all of you have, I love Target. I'm not a big corporate guy, but, God, we need small businesses that make a mini Target. So I'm like, when you're in that checkout line, you're kind of waiting. They have that stuff on the side. They have that like magazine area, right? So I just happened to look over, and once again, you can't make this up. On the cover of Time magazine is a mosaic of Jesus Christ as like person of the year. You can't make it up. I'm like, and how many times is a religious figure on the cover of Time magazine, especially in today's world, right, where religions are kind of on the decline and spiritualism is on the incline, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and I think that's the expansion of consciousness that's really happening more currently. But yeah, like especially in today's time, how many times is Jesus on the cover of Time magazine? And you know what I should do is I just out of curiosity, because of the metaphysical things I've learned now and how things can happen and stuff. I'd be really curious if I could go online and see if I could find that cover of Time magazine from about December-ish last year, and see if that actually was really there. Because if you ever talk to people who've had really interesting experiences metaphysically, sometimes God, your guardian angels and things, or whoever's watching over, they can kind of come into this reality, flip something just for you, and then flip it right back, and then nobody can see it, right? So, it's kind of a trippy thought, but it's already happened to me several times, even just in the last couple of weeks, which I could tell that story sometime too. But anyway, so that really threw kind of a wrench in a lot of things for me, because I was like, gosh, I thought I was figuring this out. And then this all happened with the Jesus motif. And I was really confused. So fast forward back to that patient who I was telling the feather story to. I also told her about that. And I said, well, what do you think? And she's like, well, and of course, right? I mean, of course, I'm asking a Christian, what do they think? And of course, she's like, dude, duh, Jesus is trying to pull you in. And I said, I get that. I'm like, I'm sure Jesus is trying to pull me in, because I do believe Jesus was a real person and a gifted healer and an excelled student in Torah and other things, right? And there's past life regressions from people to confirm a lot of that he was real, he was gifted, he was a healer. But in those past life regressions, and I guess one of these times I'll have a discussion about Christianity and other religions and my thoughts on them. But anyway, she was like, oh, he's trying to bring you in. I'm like, gosh, I don't know. And I said, God, but why not Buddhism? Why not these other things that I've had some connection with, and I know deep inside, and there's other people too that feel there's validity to a lot of what they're saying. And I just don't think those people are going to go to hell just because they don't believe in this exact path. I just don't. They're just, my gut tells me, and I have a very good intuition. My intuition just tells me that can't be right. And she's like, well, I won't twist your arm, right? We're still great friends. Every time she comes in and she gets treated, we always have a good laugh. She's awesome. And I won't name names just because I don't know if she cares or not. So anyway, so that happens, right? So then fast forward now to the golf incident, right? So back to the golf guy with me and Scott. So I'm telling him about Brian Weiss. He's like, yeah, and he confirms everything. He's telling me all these amazing lives and all this like crazy stuff he remembered. And I was like, wow, that's super cool. And I was like, well, just out of curiosity, I said, knowing everything you know and all the stuff that you remember, do you still ascribe to a religion? He's like, yeah, I do, actually. And I was like, really? I was like, well, what religion do you ascribe to? And he's like, I'm a Buddhist. And I was like, boom, that was the moment. That's what I needed. I didn't even know I needed that, and I got it. And that's how crazy this is when you ask for something. When you ask, you're going to get what you want. But it's not going to happen in the way that you could ever predict or foresee. You won't. You just have to be open. You have to be truly open and ask and be humble. That's all you have to do. And you don't even have to be that humble, to be honest. Because the first time I asked, I wasn't that humble. I wasn't that, open. I was a little open, and that's all you have to be. You just have to be a little open. And then they can come in and tell you things and show you things, right? And the more open you become, wait and see what happens. As you open up more and more and bigger and monstrous things, the matrix starts to melt away as you open up to seeing more and listening. You see, God and your guardian angels and other people are constantly throwing things at you, constantly. But because you are closed, you do not see them. You do not see the pattern. It's like when, you have a class and have you ever had that thing where they in school, I don't know if I'm sure they still don't do this because education has really taken a dump in the last decade. But a long time ago, in the 90s, I know some of you were probably born in the 80s and 70s and you're pulling your hair out that I'm complaining about being born in that late back in time, right? But, they would show you a video and then the video would be quick and it would end, right? And they say, okay, what did you guys see? And and then a bunch of people raise their hands, and I saw, this person dancing as a robot, and this person dancing as a whatever, and this guy's shaking like this, and okay, well, how many of you saw the gorilla in the background? And it's like one person raises their hand, right? And everybody's like, what gorilla? And then they play back the tape, and sure enough, as these people are dancing, right in the background, a guy in a gorilla suit walks past and goes, and there he goes. And only one person probably out of 40 saw that, right? One kid out of 40 probably saw that. And that's what I'm talking about, is that's how this works. If you are not open to seeing these things, if your eyes are not open, your eyes may be open, but you don't see. That's what I'm talking about. And so when you ask and you are at least a little open, they can show you a little bit and you will see it, right? So anyway, so that's really what happened, right? So then, so we're, him and I were talking, and I got exactly what I needed. God showed me, universe, God, he, she, whatever you want to say, right? the source is what a lot of people from near-death experiences or past life regressions call it. The source showed me what I needed, which was that there are a lot of validity to each religion, and then it doesn't matter which one you pick. If you pick any at all, we're all still going to the same place. That's what that was starting to tell me and confirm for me. Now, a lot of people might disagree with that, and that's okay. We're all entitled to opinions, right? So, so that's what happened. I was like, oh, thank you, God. I got what I need. I got some validation that I'm not crazy. My intuition's not off, right? So that incident happened. And you'd think it would end there, and it didn't. That's not even close. I have 2 more stories of what happened in that same 2 months. I'll tell you the smaller one first, and I'll tell you the big one after that, because I had a huge one that is, to this day, will boggle my mind for the rest of my life, most likely, and I think will boggle anybody who listens to this story. So the smaller of these 2 is, hold on, I need a drink. Get my little tea here. Okay, now I got to remember what I was talking about. So, okay, told the feather one. I told the golfing one. There's the other big one. Oh, right. So anyway, this is kind of like a 2-in-1, smaller one, and we'll go to the bigger one. But I kind of started experimenting with this concept, and I don't love that word experiment. Right, because I'm sure my spirit team, guardians, and everybody's like looking down on me and like, oh my God, how much more am I gonna send this guy? Right. But hey, man, you guys made me. You guys educated me. Don't hate on the logical dude. All right, don't you guys made me this way? Don't hate. Okay, appreciate. So I just kind of like an experiment. I said, well, how particular can I go and get an answer? So, a lot of times they say, well, ask for like a feather and ask for it in like a weird way where it's for you. So I said, you know what? All right, let's go there. So I was going to go golfing that morning. And I said, you know what? I said, I meditated, and then in my head I prayed / meditated. I'm like, hey, can I please have a very particularly long and perfect feather that is placed in such a way where it is very obviously for me? That's what I asked for. So then I go golfing. And then, of course, you're having a couple alcoholic beverages, as you do when you golf. It's like half the reason people go. And I totally forgot. I totally and completely forgot I even asked for that. So then I'm like halfway through the golfing. I'm like by hole 8 or something. And then I see some feathers on the ground. I'm like, oh, my God. I'm like, I totally forgot. I asked for a particularly long, perfect feather placed in a way that will make it obvious it's for me. And I'm like, well, that can't be the feather because there's a lot of feathers down there and none of them are perfect and they're just kind of thrown around, right? Until I got to the next hole. When we got to the next tee box, we pull up and it's my turn to drive. And right next to the golf marker was a perfect goose feather, I assume, that was literally placed into the ground perfectly vertical. You can't make this up. It was perfectly placed in the ground vertical. And the second I saw it, just like I asked for, I told these guys, they added me on with this group of like 3 guys. And I was like, guys, that's my feather. And they're like, what? Did you come before you put that feather? And I'm like, no. I told them this. I told them what happened. I said what I did that morning. And I said, that feather is just for me. And then, of course, one of those drunk guys came and ruined my feather on accident, which is a bummer. I wish I could have kept it. But so that happened. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. But you'd think that would be the end of it. And it wasn't. Not long after that, I went golfing again. There's a lot of golf in these stories, I guess. I guess that's when the source God comes to me and to tell me something is apparently when I'm on the golf course. Maybe that's because I'm at most accessible or something. So I'm golfing somewhere else by myself this time, but they had me on a group. But so I pull up in the golf cart at the clubhouse, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like on my phone waiting for my tee time. And then all of a sudden, I'm like accosted by this hummingbird. And by accosted, I mean, this thing is like in my grill. It is like flying around my chest. It's all up in my face. It's so close that I'm literally like trying to dodge this guy from like poking my eye out. He's literally right in my grill. And then he flew away, right? And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, was that for me? You know? And I knew somewhere in the back of my head, I had read somewhere sometime that hummingbirds are significant in many cultures because it is the dead sending you a message, right? And so they're very, especially in Native American culture, it's very, and if you go look up the history of a hummingbird in Native American culture or several other cultures, this goes all the way back to like, I think the Mayans even knew that hummingbirds were highly significant of spirits sending you things, like dead family members or ancestors or God, you know. So anyway, so I thought in my head, I'm like, was that for me? I don't know. I mean, come on, dude. This is like, yeah, it's kind of uncommon for a hummingbird to get around people, right? They're very people shy. They don't like being around people. That's why they always fly away the second you even breathe at them, right? But I once again, I logic my way out. I noted it, but I logic my way out. So then now I'm about 45 minutes into my golf round. So I'm far. I mean, I'm like probably like 6 holes away from the clubhouse. I'm a long way away. Like if you walked that, it would probably take you like 30 minutes of walking, 20 minutes of walking to get where I was. And I'm sitting in the car. I'm waiting for one of the other people to hit their ball. And who comes and accosts me? The freaking same. And how do I know it's the same hummingbird? Because this hummingbird had a very distinct red protrusion in the middle of its chest. And I couldn't tell because they're so fast, but I almost thought it was actually its heart on the outside of its chest. Like it had a deformity and it was pumping. I could see it. I think that's what it was. It was so quick, you know, it could have just been the red mark in the middle of its chest, but I knew it was the same one. And it's flying like all up in my grill again. And I'm like, what is going on with this hummingbird? This hummingbird just wants to accost me. I'm like, is it the shirt? Is it my deodorant I'm wearing? Like, what is happening? And I thought in the back of my head, and once again, this is your intuition. And your intuition is connected to the higher version of yourself that's on the other planes, okay? So when your higher self wants to talk to you, it talks to you as intuition. And my intuition told me, dude, this is for you. Just acknowledge it. This was sent for you, right? As a sign to convince you further because once again, you are so thick-headed, you need more, and we're giving you more. We're giving you what you want. And the moment I had that thought and then I tried to deny it, I was like, I don't know. The second in my head, I said, I don't know. The hummingbird was so funny. It flew directly into my eyes. And it's like staring into my soul, okay? This thing is like, it is literally like maybe not even an inch away from the tip of my nose. Like we're about to touch and he will not leave my face alone. I'm like dodging and he's like following. I say he, but it could be any gender of a hummingbird, but it's like literally like following. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, okay, I get it. It's for me. And the second I said that, off he goes. Gone. The second I acknowledged that was for me, he flew away. That is how cool that is. And how it's not just us on this planet that have consciousness and that are part of this circle. Animals are too. And animals are also here to help you, right, in a lot of ways. And the hummingbird is one of those guides. It's a guide animal, kind of like a fox or a horse or, you know, a cow for some people. There's a lot of different ones, right? So that's actually the smaller one. If that didn't boggle your mind enough, this one's going to blow you wide open. I don't know if there's any story I could ever tell you that will blow your mind wide open other than this one. So not long after that, like I said, this all happened so in succession. Another drink. So not long after that, I have a patient who, and once again, I won't name names because this is actually quite a traumatic situation for them. So anyway, it's one of my younger patients. He's a young dude, probably in his early 20s. I think he's like 21, maybe 22. And usually when he comes in, right, I'm 30 now, right? So when someone like 21 comes in, I'm like trying to relive my old days because I know I'm too old to do any of that stuff. I can't drink more than 2 beers. There's no way I could show up to a house party anymore because I'm falling asleep at like 8:30, okay? I'm an old soul, okay? But so usually when he comes in, right, we're joking around, we're having a great time. And, you know, and I always listen to his escapades of what him and his buddies do or whatever, right? So anyway, 1 week comes by and, you know, so he's telling me, he's like, oh, I can't be here Thursday. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. What are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm taking a motorcycle trip up with my best friend who's and they're in the military, they're Marines. And, you know, he's like, oh, I'm going with my other Marine buddy, and we're going to drive our motorcycles up to San Diego. We're going to have a great time. We're going to go to some party, whatever, bar scene thing. And then we're going to drive our motorcycles back. And I'm like, dude, sounds awesome. Can't wait for when you're back to hear all the shenanigans and have a hearty laugh. So Monday or Tuesday rolls around. He comes in, and I immediately know, and I'm a pretty intuitive guy. Like I've discovered that is one of the gifts that I have been given as a healer, is that it doesn't take me more than 2 seconds to know something's wrong. I just pick it up immediately. The second he walks in the room, the energy shifts. I'm like, what's going on, man? Like, as I start treating him, I'm like, dude, usually we're joking. I'm like, what happened in San Diego? I'm like, did some cool, like, what'd you guys do? Like, what's wrong? What happened? And he's like, my friend's dead. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, he's dead. I'm like, what happened? And he said that when they were, I believe, on their way back from San Diego, him and his buddy are driving on the motorcycle, and his friend got hit by a car in front of him and died instantaneously. And, I mean, what do you say to something like that? I mean, what a terrible trauma for somebody to go through at 21 years old, besides the fact that he was a Marine and went to war and had to kill people in Iraq and other places. And so it's like, so I'm like, what? Like, what are you doing here? Like, dude, no charge for today. This is all free for today. I'm like, are you going to work? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to work. I said, no, you're not. I said, if you don't call out right now, I will call your dealership where you work and I will cancel work for you. So he's like, okay. So he cancels work. And I said, go take a week. You need to process this, because I almost feel, even though that there's like only a 9-year gap, I felt kind of like a mentor at that point. You want to help a fellow human being out. And I do this for my patients all the time. And constantly people say, God, are you only 30? Like, you have the knowledge of like somebody old, like you're like an old sage. I come to you for advice, even though I'm like 20 years older. And, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I kind of assumed that immediate role of kind of being the bigger brother and just saying, look, man, like, you need to take time to process this. This is not a normal occurrence. Like, most people never have something like this happen in their whole life. So anyway, so he goes home to process. Okay, here's where it gets crazy. So like 2 nights later, I go to bed and I have a dream. And immediately, this is not your average Joe Schmo dream. This is a weird dream where I'm kind of out of my own body. And I think I kind of understand what actually happened now. I don't think it was a dream. I think I was actually out of my own body. Because that's kind of how it works when you actually pop out of your body. You can see yourself down below and kind of be like, is that me? But I'm like watching myself in bed, and standing to the side of my mattress, looking at me, is this large, shadowy figure. It's kind of like I would say probably 6 foot tall, giant shadow. And it's not ominous. I know that sounds scary. It almost sounds like a horror, like Poltergeist movie. But I instinctively knew that it wasn't a bad thing. I immediately knew that. And I just knew that it was a male figure. Anyway, I wake up immediately, and the really strange thing is, my patient's first and last name popped up into my mind immediately, like you just inserted a text into my brain. And I'm thinking, God, well, that's weird. And this is the middle of the night. So I immediately go to my phone, I pull up my, schedule for the next day or for that day. And I'm like, oh my God, he's on at like 9 o'clock. He's one of my first patients in the morning. And so anyway, I go to work, right? And he comes in, and I tell him the story. And I say, look, I know this is going to sound really crazy because I know he's atheist. I'm like, I know this is going to sound really bizarre. And I'm not trying to scare you or make you feel bad about your situation, okay? I just said, I think your dead friend visited me in a dream. And he's like, he goes like pale, ghost white. He's like, what? And I'm like, I told him the dream. And as I'm like telling him the dream, like some piece of information just starts leaking into my brain. Like it's almost like the text message thing of his first and last name. It's like, I feel like somebody's telling me what to tell him. It's like, it's not my own brain. Somebody else is telling me what I should tell him. And so as I'm telling the story, it's like, the second I finished the story, I said, okay, now there's something else I have to tell you that I didn't know until right now. I said, he basically wants me to tell you that he's going to be fine. He's okay. He's doing well. But he doesn't want you to keep beating yourself up and feeling guilty about his death. And I just knew that's what he needed to hear. And even now, I can't tell you how I knew that. It just was put into my brain. It was like you just downloaded it into my head, and I got it live. And I didn't get it until the right moment, which is so cool. And that really threw him. To be honest with you, that really threw him for a loop. And so he goes home. I'd probably say a week later, I'm out in front of the clinic. And I processed that instance for like a whole week. It really did. It really made me think about a lot. And I thanked God for it. I thanked my guardian angels and whoever might be watching me. And I said, one morning, I said, man, that was really interesting. I said, can you give me one more confirmation that I just didn't make that up? Because it is so easy to logic your way out of the legitimacy of that instance, right? I could say, well, I just said that because I needed him to get comfort. And so I go back in, I sit down, and who comes in? My patient. He comes in like 30 seconds after I said that. And he says, I have to tell you something. And I'm thinking, uh-oh. And he's like, no, it's good. He's like, a week ago when you told me that, I went home and I told my wife what your dream was. And my wife flipped out. And he said that the same night, basically, that I had that dream, not long after that, his wife's coworker had a dream. And it's a little old lady. She's never seen my patient. This is important. She's never seen my patient physically. She's never seen my patient's friend, and she didn't know about the accident. Okay. She had a dream where she saw a young white male in his early 20s with short, spiky hair, black, short, spiky hair, riding a motorcycle. That's my patient. Riding a motorcycle, and attached to his motorcycle was a string. And at the end of that string in the sky was a young black male in his early 20s, a little overweight, in a parachute. And who is that? It's a perfect description of his best friend. She wakes up, and you know what happened? She had my patient's first and last name downloaded into her head the second she woke up. But she made the connection that it was her coworker's husband because they shared the same last name. Now, if that doesn't boggle your mind enough yet, I need you to think about something for a second, and I want you to think about how time works here. Time here is linear, but time in actuality is a circle. There is no time. It's an earthly creation. Okay? Because think about this. I told him my dream a week before that. He wanted to tell me this for an entire week before he ended up telling me. But I didn't ask for further insane confirmation of this until a minute before he walks in through my door. Which means that time does not exist. Time is not linear. They had already, this is such a complicated system of how existence and time works that this was already figured out way before I even asked. That's how crazy this really is. So we're sitting at right now about probably 55 minutes in, and I think that's probably a pretty appropriate place to end the first episode of the podcast, the Unruly Doctor podcast. So there's something I want to ask you to do. Could you please, if you haven't already, like and subscribe to our YouTube page and hit the reminder bell so that you get all of our newest content of either me treating patients or I'm hoping now our podcast that's hopefully going to be wildly successful. And I really truly believe that this podcast is going to be huge. I think it's going to be bigger than my clinic. I really have this intense gut feeling, and I've been getting so many signs that this is really what part of what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to reach people and to open their minds and their hearts to something bigger. So please do that. And I really hope that you guys have a great day. And I'm really excited to bring you more content, bring you more guests. And this is kind of a first go around as the tester just to see how everything goes. All right, guys. Thanks so much.